Jessica asked me to tell a few personal stories, not that I haven't been telling personal stories for the last 40 minutes as we finished up. So I tried to think of some instances that were a little bit unique to my situation. And the first one that comes to mind is to tell you a bit about my 20th birthday. I was going to get married that summer, and so my parents and I was getting married in France, and so my parents and I had checked out airfares to see if I could get just a one-way ticket to France and ship some of my personal items, and the cost was rather ridiculous. So as a lark, I looked into doing a crossing on the SS France, which at the time, it's now the Norway if you're familiar with cruise ships. At the time it was considered the luxury ocean liner, and it took 5 days to sail from New York to Le Havre, France. And as it turned out, it was way less expensive. So 19-year-old me hopped on board the ship with my trunks and boxes and suitcases, and just had a wonderful adventure. On my 20th birthday, I was on board and got to have my own celebration at the table with the people that we had been eating with, and then my friend and I just had a great time because I traveled with a girlfriend. We just had a great time exploring the ship and having fun. I arrived safely in France, not too much the worse for wear, and did end up getting married several months later. For our honeymoon, my husband and I had decided that we were going to have an adventure, and so we listened to the recommendations of a few friends of mine, a few college friends, and ended up going grape picking in the south of France, near Draguignan. The countryside was beautiful, the work was backbreaking, but the grapes were delicious. So here we were on our honeymoon, and for the first 2 days we were so exhausted that we would get back to the little tiny room in the little tiny village where we were staying and just fall asleep, just exhausted. But by the third day, we had been eating maybe not as much as we were picking, but we were certainly enjoying the delicious taste of grapes right off the vine. And by the third day, their revenge kicked in. It was a very uncomfortable time for both of us.
Just married.
Just married. Also, the rains began several days into our picking experience. So we were in the mud with raincoats, bent over, picking grapes. Anyway, I would just advise any of you out there listening to this, don't let your friends talk you into it. It's an adventure, not a good one for a honeymoon. 40 years later, when I remarried, my husband and I got married in May and traveled to France for our honeymoon and also a study abroad. I guess I'm just destined to have unusual honeymoons. So here we were with 15 students in France. But on the day of my 60th birthday, we were at the Mont Saint-Michel. And I have to say it was one of the most extraordinary and memorable days of my life. When we returned back to Rouen with the students, my co-teacher from Cleveland State, my new husband, and I went to the only 5-star hotel lobby in Rouen and had champagne and hors d'oeuvres. And it was just the perfect end to the perfect day. During those 40 years in between, there have been a lot of adventures. But most of my favorites concern my children and now my grandchildren. I'm very blessed to have 3 beautiful granddaughters, aged 8, 6.5, and 16 months. The 8-year-old is a brunette, the 6.5-year-old is a blonde, and the 16-month-old is a redhead. Go figure. And probably my favorite memory at this point of the 3 of them is when they first met, which was about a year ago. It was in my house in Macon on Memorial Day. They all got together, and for the 6-year-old, it was a bit of an interesting experience. It was the first time she had traveled that far. It was about a 4.5 hour trip for her from her home. But it was the first time that she was in another house with a lot of people for an extended period of time. And of course she was a baby, so babies cry. But the 8-year-old, then 7, soon found out that any time that little Opal would cry, if she danced and played around, it made Opal laugh. So by the end of the weekend, anytime Opal would even sniff or look like she was going to cry, Isabel pushed all of us out of the way and said, "No, no, no, let me get there. I can make her laugh." And sure enough, she would start dancing and Opal started laughing. Sophie, on the other hand, was somewhat indifferent to the baby. She was focused on Legos and gymnastics. She's our little athlete, although they're all very athletic. And of course, the smartest and most beautiful children I've ever seen, except for my own. I am so fortunate to have really great kids. My children, my daughter, who went to the University of Florida, has an undergraduate degree in exercise and sport science and a master's in sport management because she wanted to run a gym. The good news is that running a gym helped her meet her now husband and the father of her children, and he's just a man that I adore. It also led her to change careers. They are both firefighter paramedics now. And so my daughter has somewhat followed into her mom's footsteps, but taken it far further and went into a very unconventional, male-dominated field and has really excelled. She is highly respected, has received all kinds of honors for service, community service, as a paramedic, as a person, and I couldn't be prouder of her. My son, who kind of wandered, always worked hard, but never really sure what he wanted to do, finally moved in with me in Macon about 5 or 6 years ago when I moved to Georgia, thinking that he might go back to school, and he did. He went back and got his master's in library science, and also met his wife. She got a job in Cookeville, Tennessee, and so that's where my son and daughter-in-law live. He did work as a librarian for a while. He's now working in the lab with her, just because it's a little more convenient and pays a whole lot better than being a librarian. But he's looking forward to finding full-time work as a librarian as well. So that's my family. My husband, as I mentioned, I remarried 2 years ago, and my husband teaches as well, and so it's wonderful to be able to compare notes and share ideas, share professions, and also introduce each other to new ideas. He teaches medicine, I teach French, so very different career directions.
What's your favorite memory of your children together? Maybe when they were small.
My favorite moment of my children together, oh gosh, there are so many. We used to spend summers in England. My ex-husband was a camp director, and so he would take groups of French students, and we would spend 6 weeks in England in the summer. And seeing my children with the older campers, watching them in that environment was really great. I think it was a wonderful growing up experience for them. They were in charge because they were bilingual. And so they, to see my son, this little 6-year-old, or my daughter, a 9-year-old, with these teenagers, explaining to them how things worked in English, being their tour guides in London, because my kids had been there so many times that they knew their way around London. They would go into shops with them. They would go shopping because they could ask the students questions in French and then translate for the shopkeepers into English. So that was, it was a wonderfully rewarding experience and made them so much more grown up. But really just seeing that because we moved our kids around so much, they grew up becoming each other's best friends. And so my daughter, being the older one, was very protective of her little brother. I remember in high school, he would get dressed in the morning and she would grab him and say, "You're not wearing that to school. That looks so geeky." He didn't care, and so he would just let her pick out his clothes and dress him. And I remember one morning in particular having him standing in front of the mirror in the hallway with my daughter behind him. She had changed everything he was going to be wearing. She pushed down his socks because he had them pulled up too high. And then she was folding up the sleeves on his t-shirt, pulling out his t-shirt because he had it tucked in, and kind of messing up his hair and saying, "Okay, now you can go to school." So there was just sort of a warm relationship between the two of them that obviously has changed, but is now sort of coming back full circle now that they both have children and professional lives and live far enough away that they've gotten over that period of sibling rivalry. I could go on for hours, but I think we all have other things to do, and I appreciate your attention.
Thank you.